Way of the Dragon sees a martial artist arrive in Rome to protect a family-owned restaurant from a local crime syndicate. This one is directed by Bruce Lee himself and builds to a face-to-face with three-time karate world champion Chuck Norris. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Mamma mia.
That is a line from this movie. At least in the dub version. Although I suspect that part's probably the same in any version, just because.
Mamma mia is every language knows what Mamma mia means.
Or every country expects Italians to say it, therefore it will be there.
Look, the last Bruce Lee movie we already spent some time on the not overt but very casual racism thrown around, and this movie continues that tradition strongly.
Yeah, I don't think it's as bad in this one though, just because it's not like, hey, they're the villains because they're this. It's just that some of the villains, because when it's set in Rome, the entire movie's set in Rome, so there's a lot of Italians walking about, and one of the villains says "Mamma Mia" at one point. Anyway, we're here today to talk about The Way of the Dragon. This is the third in our Bruce Lee season out of 5, and we already did Fist of Fury, we did The Big Boss. This is the one that is actually written and directed by Bruce Lee. So I'll be curious to see how we feel about that side of things. But this is, this is the one before Enter the Dragon, right? This is the start. I mean, presumably, had Bruce Lee lived, there'd have been lots of movies with the word dragon in the title somewhere.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Would be my guess.
Apparently, this was even when it was released in America initially, because they keep on messing with the names to try to sell more. This was billed as Return of the Dragon because they really wanted to cash in on Enter the Dragon.
So they tried to pretend it was a sequel, even though it
absolutely.
Really isn't.
It was a Troll 2 before it even happened.
Okay, yeah. So we'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get into the spoilers, and of course, if you are enjoying the show, please do hit the like button on YouTube. It helps us out a bunch. You can get bonus shows from us over in Patreon, but I'll tell you more about that at the end of the episode. So, yeah, honestly, plot here is quite simple once again. None of these have had super in-depth plots so far. I would describe this, you know how Seven Samurai, right? The basic just Seven Samurai is, farmers are getting harassed by crime and they go and seek out help by hiring Seven Samurai. It's kind of like that, but swap out farmers for a restaurant and swap out Seven Samurai for one Bruce Lee. And that is the premise.
I mean, that's a fair trade. That's about the same.
So that is the basic gist. He comes to Rome because his uncle knows the owner of this restaurant, Chen, who's kind of the love interest. Doesn't feel quite right, but she's the female lead of the movie.
Yeah, they have a few sequences to kind of almost touch on it, but it seems much more friendly and like familial than anything else.
Yeah, it could have went that way. It just doesn't quite go down that path. But he's sent there to help. He's sent there to solve this problem. And there's even a line she has early on. It's like, oh, I thought my uncle would be sending like a lawyer. Who are you? Like, what is this? But we'll get
I'm having legal troubles and like real estate law. Can you please help with that? No? Okay, bye.
Yeah, we'll get into kind of the way the characters play off each other when we get into spoilers. But yeah, I mean that's basically it. Bad guys show up. Bruce Lee fights a bit, and it escalates throughout, but it never really gets more complicated plot wise. Eventually, there's a Chuck Norris, but the context of how he enters the movie will save. But Chuck Norris does, and you know why they hired him. It tells you in the opening titles. It says Chuck Norris, 7-time karate world champion.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, that's why he was hired. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I read a trivia bit that apparently Bruce Lee specifically selected him because he was the only one who could keep up with Bruce Lee out of all the guys they tried. And I mean, that just sounds like a Chuck Norris fact, doesn't it? Like, that just sounds like Chuck Norris is the only one who could keep up with Bruce Lee.
Yeah, maybe it's the original Chuck Norris fact. Yeah. The only one that's actually true out of all the Chuck Norris facts. Yeah, and much to his strengths, Chuck Norris does not say a single word in this movie. He is silent.
He does have one or two lines, but for the most part, you're right.
I don't think he did. Oh, well, I mean, we'll discuss that in spoilers,
When he
I guess.
very first gets introduced, he walks in and there's like two people fighting, and he's like, "That guy's my student," and that's all he says.
Oh, I don't remember him saying that, but
Yeah.
fair enough. I'm not going to debate you on it, but like, he's mostly just silent, and like the music lets you know he's the villain because you get this like twangy string every time he looks at anyone, like bang, bang.
It's the predecessor to the Walker Texas Ranger. It's right there.
It actually sounds a lot like the first couple of notes of the villain's theme from Once Upon a Time in the West, which I'm sure we'll do at some point. I'll have a reason for that on our season at some day.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's what it was making me think of, that music. But anyway, so yeah, different premise. Bruce Lee's character is back to being more of a noble hero this time, as opposed to the psychopath that he was in Fist of Fury. So that's cool, and we'll discuss that a bit more later as well. But without further ado, David, what did you think of Way of the Dragon?
Boy, this one's actually kind of tough. Not because I think I disliked it. I think I liked it pretty much throughout. But there is a definitive tone switch at the third act. The first two acts of this movie, I don't want to call it silly, but there's a quirkiness and silliness to it that I kind of understand Bruce Lee's sense of humor, more or less, of like what he enjoys like doing for the most part. And then as soon as the third act hits, everything gets so much more serious. And I think for me personally, while I enjoyed the first two acts for what they were, in terms of saving this as a Bruce Lee kung fu movie, I think that third act is doing all the heavy lifting. And I think it works. Like I as much as it sounds like a complete parody of, oh, the fight scene between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris is like super amazing. Like it is. It absolutely is. It's a great fight scene, and I love the way they portray it throughout. It's got a few interesting character twists as well, but for the most part, it's a very like I don't want to keep saying silly because that's wrong. It's the wrong word for it. But there's a quirky sense of humor to it to start off that once the third act hits, it just completely throws away. And I enjoyed both of them, but it felt very weird at the transition point. So I liked it, but it's kind of two different movies in one.
Yeah, this one threw me for a loop a little bit when it was starting off, because the opening like chunk of the movie is very... Honestly, the thing it made me think of the most, and obviously it's not as silly as this and it's not as comical as this, but it almost felt like Mr. Bean to me, where Bruce Lee's on his own, he's arrived at the airport, and there's a lot of him just kind of awkwardly not knowing how to interact with people in the airport and like try to get something to eat in a restaurant and stuff like that. And we'll go through all the details of that in spoilers, but there's very much just this like, and then the next part of his day is this, and then the next part of his day is this, and it go like that first day he spends in Rome, we go almost like scene for scene, just in order of like, here's what his first day here is, and his awkward interactions with everyone that he encounters, and it was like a really weird, and I kind of appreciated like how just different it was to the last two movies, and to be fair, all three of them that we've done so far have been very different in terms of tone, in terms of like none of them have got super deep stories by any means, right? I think when we get to those ratings at the end and we're doing the script story versus all the other things, I think the script story has been the weakest element of each of them, and it's probably going to be the same here as well. But like there was just like a sort of it felt like he was just having like this weird fun of like, oh, like maybe this is some like mirroring some interactions he's had as a, you know, as a foreign man who's had to like be in the US, and like some of the weird interactions he's had. Maybe he's pulling from some experiences to show this stuff in movies. But I generally had fun with the tone. I like some of the recurring things that were starting to make me laugh, even though it's kind of a negative in a way, is the amount of times we fight in the same alleyway behind this restaurant. It was making me cackle at a certain point where, you know, the first time we see it, there's training, the second time we see it, there's some more training, and then every time someone shows up for a fight, let's step outside, not the front, but we're going to go out to the back alley, that same set that we've used like 10 times. But at the same time, the movie's also got a lot of like, oh, we're driving around in Rome, there's the Colosseum, there's, you know, all this stuff we're looking at.
Yes and no. It you say there's a lot of it, but I definitely feel like that was one day of filming.
Oh,
They
sure,
had exactly
sure.
that long,
But
and they did not have any more.
but it's sprinkled like the right amounts, and
Yes.
I think they were economical with their budget there. Notably, a lot of the scenes where there's like talking when they're in Rome or driving in Rome, we never cut inside the car. It's always just a wide shot of the car driving past the Colosseum, and you just hear them talking as they go past. So it's all dubbed in later. I mean, yeah, everything was dubbed in later technically in my
Yeah,
version.
even the English voices were all
Yes.
dubbed in later, which it was strange to me, but I guess it was economical. I guess it made sense.
Yeah, I think maybe it's just a case of the original track has, like, I don't know, for whatever reason they wanted to switch it up because maybe when they did the dub they didn't have access to the original voices for some reason or whatever. But obviously a lot of this, I mean, I assume the original track has either everything would be in like the original language or some characters might be speaking Italian, but I suspect it's probably a case of, in the same way that we'd have them all speaking English, I presume they were all speaking, Cantonese or Mandarin in the original track. And there's probably a track for both languages. Actually, a lot of these movies have both as an option.
Yeah, I mean, I only had the English version for mine.
Yeah.
Usually it gives me like a switch to this audio track option,
Yeah.
but this was only English.
I actually I laughed at the end of the movie because you said last time, oh, I bet the next one was originally in English because there's no way Chuck Norris is speaking whatever. And then I got to the end and went, he said nothing.
Yeah.
It does not matter which language you watch this in because he's not saying
that's fair.
anything.
I mean, I listened to that one line he said. It sounded enough like him, but it was one line, and this is like very like 20-something-year-old Chuck Norris.
Yeah, this is
so,
young Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, that man has weird body hair because like he's got like a really furry like chest and like
Yeah.
shoulders, right? But then when he turned around, he only has hair at the very top of his back, and then it's like ultra smooth, like beyond a certain line going down his back. That's very
Yeah.
weird.
That's where he's able to shave. He can't reach that high.
And I say this all as a man who has, hair on his shoulders and back. I know what I'm expecting here. His arms were also pretty smooth as well. They're just very strange. It was like very thick in places and then very non-existent other places.
It was 70s, man. It was a different expectation for body hair back then.
Well, you think he was trimming the parts that were clean?
I don't know. I have no idea what he was doing. Because, I mean, that theoretically, if he wanted to come in with a silky smooth body, he could have. They have
could
the
have,
ability
yeah.
to wax and shave, but he went with this.
I'm not even complaining. It's not even like it's a problem. It was just I just noticed it. It was a little bit strange.
Mm-hmm.
That is all. But yeah, I mean, the fighting is, it's less. What's funny is that despite the fact that the movie's a lot more comical in its tone and there's a lot more sort of like silly humor, the actual fighting itself is a lot less silly. It felt like it was a lot more grounded this time compared to some of the other, because some of the other ones had like jumping into the air, swords
Yeah.
coming down, stuff like that. This one, for one, I wouldn't say it looks realistic, but it's definitely, the blood's much better than the paint from the last two movies. So that's one step up.
I agree with you that it feels more grounded, but I don't think it feels more brutal. It feels a lot more
sure.
just like, a street fight sort of thing, rather than the interesting choreography we at least got with the other ones.
Oh yeah, I didn't mean to imply more brutal. I just meant it wasn't trying to be as flashy.
Right.
Instead, it felt like the camera work was a little bit more confident. There was, there were like, for example, there's one. Obviously, the other movies did zoom ins and things, but there's one moment in this movie where there's a slow track into Bruce Lee as he's posing, and I thought, oh, that made him look a badass. That felt a lot more refined and tight than some of the little tricks that we're using in the past movies. It felt a little bit more like, oh, this. And so, like, I almost feel the last one might have had a bigger budget, but this one feels like the actual direction, and maybe this is a credit to Bruce Lee since he's the director. It feels just a little bit more cinematic in how it's actually capturing the fights.
Yeah, it feels like this one is a lot more set on making Bruce Lee less of a superhero and just more of a badass. Like it's a lot more focused on he's able to do these stunts as a human, not we're going to jump over a 10-foot high fence here in a single bound.
Yeah, so everything he does is impressive because he's just doing it.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
there's no trickery for a lot of it. And I don't know if it's an urban myth or what, but there was like an old story that Bruce Lee had to actually like slow down his kicks because they was too quick for the shutter speed of the camera to properly capture.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I also think that's just keep it in, man. Make people have to freeze frame that stuff.
The myth of Bruce Lee. That's a Bruce Lee fact. I don't know if Chuck Norris has to slow down his kicks. Well, what's so funny about Chuck Norris is that I feel like his era of movies where he was a star in a lot of like, I don't even want to call them B movies, C movies is more accurate.
The straight to videos.
Yeah, but they're all like, you know, generic guy with guns movies. Like he's not a martial artist in most of those. I'm sure he is in a couple of them, but most of them he's just got a machine gun. So it's kind of interesting seeing young Chuck Norris be a martial artist. I don't know, just...
No, I mean, that's... It definitely strikes me as the sort of thing as making a shooting movie is a lot easier than making a martial arts movie. It's just in terms of choreography, in terms of like, you know, how do we make sure that this stunt lines up? Well, for a martial arts movie, you got to make sure either the camera is positioned a certain way to make it look like it lands, and then you have to figure out like the blocking of everyone else. For a shooting movie, it's just aim that in the general direction and you're probably going to make it look fine. Yeah. So I think it's just a thing where his martial arts got him into the door, but then when he became a more household name, he was able to just pivot over to, I want to be in a lot of movies, therefore shooting.
Yeah. I wonder if it's all just an age thing where he, like, after a certain age, he's like, yeah, I'm not doing kicks and stuff anymore.
He was 1,000 times more graceful than Seagal. That's the bottom of the barrel in terms of aging in your movies.
That is fair. I do think Steven Seagal has a couple of movies that are easily better than anything Chuck Norris ever made as a starring role, but yeah, like the decline was much steeper.
Yeah.
So yeah, keep that in mind. But anyway, so yeah, I mean the plot's kind of whatever. It is a little bit like backwards and forwards, and all like there's so many scenes in the restaurant and so many scenes in the alley behind the restaurant. But there was almost a bit of a charm to that, where we kept just coming back to the same location over and over again. Yeah, I don't know. I had fun with most of it, to be fair.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. I do think that there was a point in this movie where they get the upper hand on the boss's goons, or even the boss himself, without too much spoiling, but they let him go with a warning one too many times for me. And I think once it hits that last time, I'm like, well, now anything that happens after this point is your fault. Like, this is 100%, like, you need to take care of this guy with an actual, like, force here. You need to be Bruce Lee in either of the previous two movies, because this one, you're just saying, hey, mister, you brought, like, knives and guns and scared my guys and possibly could have killed us. So don't do it again. Like, no, do something about it.
I don't know, I'm 50-50 on that complaint, because on the one hand, yes, like, should it feel more severe than what he's reacting? Probably. However, I think the way this movie actually treats the idea of killing a bad guy just because he's a bad guy, I actually kind of like how it sort of like tackles that.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not saying he should even just be killed, but I just think, like, he beats the crap out of all the goons, and then he just walks up to the boss and just, like, smacks his face and just, like, now, cut it out. Like, no, beat him up. Leave him with some memories.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll get into the spoilers, I think. I don't think there's too much more to discuss here without going into it.
The only other thing I wanted to bring up, it has a theme in the first half that the best I could describe is like a whistle sort of theme. It's a very catchy tune to it. And then about a third of the way in the movie, it just stops and never shows up again. And that threw me for a loop because they were playing it like every 2 minutes in the first third. It was just over and over again. It's essentially Bruce Lee's comedy theme, because that's where most of the comedy is happening, is in that first third. But it's so catchy that I expected it to just be the theme throughout the movie.
Yeah, it went mostly quiet. Once it got serious, it kind of stayed serious by just not having music. It was like, no, we're going to... I mean, there was maybe one or two bits that did, but like the final fight, for example, is just completely silent. It's like nothing but the sound of the fight. To it's all diegetic. So yeah. All right. So spoilers for Way of the Dragon. You've been warned. Not that there's a ton to spoil in this one, really, but Just full disclosure, so we can get into it without worrying about anything. So yeah, the entire first like chunk of this movie is really fascinating because it takes a while before we get to a fight. It takes like a half an hour till there's properly someone for him to fight, and in that time, like everything, like because the movie starts with him like waiting in the airport, and there's just this random old woman staring at him from like 7 inches from his face for no reason.
I loved this sequence. Like, I thought if the entire movie is this level of humor, this is fantastic because, like, Bruce Lee's playing the straight man here, and he's just, like, trying to casually and politely nod to the woman, like, hello, how's it going? But she just does not let up. She's just staring him down the entire time until finally he's like, I'm going to leave now. Goodbye.
No, it's her like husband, I assume, comes up and like gets her. She's waiting for someone, and
but then he also walks off.
Yeah, he has to actually like kind of like nudge her so she'll stop staring, and then she's like, "Oh, you're here," and then she like just sort of stops paying attention to him. But I'm like, what is her deal? Like, is she just that racist? Is she just like transfixed?
Entirely possible.
I don't understand why, but I agree it was funny because just purely because of the way he kind of tries to awkwardly kind of smirk and he's trying to act like he's not paying attention to it. Like it's all just acting on his face.
I also like the way that it started. It was only trained on his face for quite some time. You couldn't tell what was going on, and he almost had like a nervous look to him. Like he's like wiping his face and he's licking his lips over and over again. And then when it pans out, you see that it's the most banal possible situation. So it just plays on that expectation of, oh, Bruce Lee must be in a real tight spot here. He's gonna have to fight something. Oh no, wait, it's just an old woman staring him down.
And he's just, he's quiet. He walks off. He does a little thing where he scares a kid, like just as a quick little scene.
Please tell me I missed something there because like this kid, he's just standing in the middle of the hallway, licking his ice cream. Bruce Lee walks past him, then decides to go back, stand behind him, tap him on the shoulder, and then like lunges at him while shoving his own hand in his mouth. And then the kid goes off screaming, which frankly I would too at that point.
Yes. His hand in his own mouth for the record, not the kid's mouth, like his own mouth.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. I didn't realize that preposition was needed.
Just in case yes. Anyone, because that's a very different, that's crossing a line into a crime at that point.
That's Bruce Lee getting back into the psychopath territory from last movie.
He leans against like a wall next to a door, and this guy comes out, and for some reason this guy, who I do not believe works at this restaurant in the airport, he just looks at Bruce Lee for some reason and says, "Oh, go right in." Okay. Do you work here, sir? That's a strange thing for us, like another civilian to say, but okay.
I mean, it was weird for him to say, but I just took it as him holding the door open and Bruce Lee just like not like him thinking that Bruce Lee didn't understand the custom of like, oh, you can enter, go in.
What's funny is that I didn't realize we were in Italy yet, right? I assumed that he'd came to the US just because, movies. And I'm sure I knew it was Italy from reading the description last time and forgot about it, but it didn't occur to me. So when he looked at the prices on the menu, I was like, what currency is this in? Like it was like 2,000 for a burger? What? And obviously it would have been what the Italians used before the euro. Lira?
Oh god, you're gonna call me out on that. I have no idea. That sounds right.
That's something like that. Anyway, so it made sense, but once they got outside and I realized, oh, they're in Italy. It made a bit more sense. But he tries to ask for eggs, and I got very confused with this, right? So one, it felt like he was uncomfortable because he thought the prices were far too high. All right, which fair enough. But he basically just doesn't look at the menu. He sort of closes it like he's horrified by it. He's like, like all those prices, and he looks at the waitress and he goes, eggs, right? He's sort of trying to say it slowly for her, right? And obviously, and I didn't get. Okay, is he saying it in English, but she doesn't speak English? She speaks Italian, but the dub's got her speaking in English. So I didn't really know if it was like, because I'm like, he's clearly saying eggs. Why are you confused, woman? What's so confusing about him saying eggs?
I thought maybe she only speaks Italian, but then I was thinking, this is an airport. She needs to be able to speak a couple different things here, at the very least English.
Yes, maybe not like full sentences, but at least the menu items. like know what eggs means.
I will say there's a scene much later on where he is speaking in English, and he says, he says to the lackey of the boss, "You tell your boss, who's standing right there, you tell your boss that he needs to stay out of here or else." And then the lackey says, also in English, "Hey boss, he told us to get out of here." So clearly there was supposed to be some part that's in one language and then English.
Also,
but
it's confusing even the way you said that, because I'm not convinced that's what they were actually technically speaking. I mean, I know that's what we were hearing, but I think he might have been speaking in Cantonese or whatever.
Oh, no, I'm sure he was. But that's why I'm saying the English dub introduces that problem.
Yes. So, yeah, that is strange. But regardless, he does like a little thing where he just sort of looks at the soup page because it's the cheapest things on the menu, and he kind of runs his finger down and he finds one he likes and he taps at that, and she's like, okay, and she takes the menu away. But she, either intentionally or she's just this stupid, took his finger going down the page as him saying, "I want everything my fingers past." So she brings him a tray of 5 different bowls of soup, and he just tries to like, because he doesn't want to be awkward and he wants to pretend that that's what he was asking for, he's like, "Yes, I'll get my napkin ready. This is what I wanted, 5 different bowls of soup."
In fairness, though, he goes in.
Oh, he does.
He finishes them. So good on him.
Yeah. I will say there was a lot of continuity errors here, because every single time it cut to a different shot, it was different colors of soup in different places every single time.
This is one of those times where I'm not convinced they had a spit bucket on hand, and this was just, all right, we're going to sit here for 30 minutes, and however much Bruce can get down, that's how much we're going to film.
But he does have some money. He does pay her, because I thought the end of the scene was going to be, oh no, I have to pay for this? I didn't understand.
Yeah, I thought it would be that he presents the money, but like doesn't have any idea how much any of this actually costs, because we find out later on, and I kind of picked it up from this scene, he's essentially illiterate. Like, maybe it's just for English text, but he has a problem with reading a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably just the fact that it's a different language rather than that he's just illiterate in general.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that later on, he has to read off a phone number, and he's struggling with that, which makes me, like, Arabic numbers are still used, not all the time, but they're used worldwide, so I would assume he should at least be familiar with that.
Well, yeah, but I think he was trying to say them slowly so the operator could understand.
Oh, you think it was a language barrier?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Oh, okay, that's possible, yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, can you say that again for me?" And I think he was getting frustrated because, like, you know, the guy need to go so slow.
Problems that the English dub introduces in understanding.
So, yeah, but anyway, he goes back out into the main part of the airport. He's waiting around, and then our main female character is out there, Chen, who the actress was in the past 2 movies, not as like one of the lead females, but she was in a small role in both movies. So this is kind of like a promotion for her as an actress. Yeah. But he's got a photograph of her, and he's looking at her. He's looking back at the photograph, and he eventually kind of smiles at her and says, "Oh, it's me. You're looking for me." And she's like, "Oh." And I want to point out here that for the first like half hour of this movie, I love the general. She's civil enough, she's nice enough, and she makes sure she explains he's got a place to stay and like offers them anything, whatever. Very courteous, all the rest of it. But the entire time, her tone and the look on her face is like, I can't believe my uncle sent this guy. What is he going to do? Like, she's clearly disappointed and just not amused by who Bruce Lee is, and not amused by any of his attempts at being charming or doing a silly little smile or anything like that, right? Because when they go out to her car, he sort of like doesn't get in right away, and he starts like sort of going, "Oh, is it a BMW?" And she's like, "Oh, why is this guy so like why does he get such a character? Just get in the car. Get in the effing car."
There's a lot in this movie that implies, and I think this is probably more of a cultural thing that just doesn't come across. He is essentially the Hong Kong version of a country bumpkin. Like he's numerous times says he doesn't live in the city, he lives out in the country. And he, he's so impressed with this car, he doesn't have any idea about like the ordering food and whatnot. So I think it's supposed to be implied that he is just essentially the equivalent of this hillbilly who shows up and like, you've got this problem with mafia or whatever, and you're like, how in the hell is this guy supposed to help?
Yeah, it just kind of feels like she's like, oh, how can this simpleton ever possibly help with this situation? And she explains in the car on the drive where she's going what the premise of the movie is, which is that her dad or uncle, someone died a few months ago, left her the family restaurant, and she was delighted to keep it running, and things were going well, but out of nowhere this mob showed up, this syndicate wanted to like force her to sell it, and they keep scaring away our customers. So business is now terrible because the bad guys are forcing all the customers away. And she was hoping for some sort of real estate lawyer or something to come and help with this. Instead, this young guy who doesn't clearly understand the whole lot has shown up, and that's like, you know, like so it's like, hey, here's where I live. There's an extra spare room. You know, your uncle's friend. So like, I'll, you know, make sure you're good for things. And this is where I really started to like. And this sounds like I'm going to complain about this, and I'm not, because I actually think it's really charming in this movie for some reason. Is that the next part of this movie is she just sort of says, hey, do you need any money? She offers him money, and he's like, oh, no, I've got money. And she's like, oh, okay, wait, do you have it on? And he's like, yeah, I've got it. It's better to keep it on me. And she's like, well, that should be in a bank. And it's like, no, it's better to keep it on me. I can protect it that way. He's like, no, I think you should probably put it in a bank. And she basically insists and says, I'm taking you to a bank. And we get a sequence where they go to a bank, and Bruce Lee acts like the banker who's asking like for like, you know, what money are you putting in. Like Bruce Lee like thinks he's getting robbed by this man when like he's trying to get money off of him, and she's trying to explain, no, this is normal, this is what's supposed to happen. And this is what I was getting at earlier when I was saying the opening like half hour of this movie just goes through the sequence of each event that happens on the day that he arrives. You know, because even this, and then like when we go to the restaurant after and he meets everyone for the first time, it's like all one big through line of like everyone underestimating him and not thinking he's going to be useful. And it's all basically just a build up until he beats the shit out of two guys like in like 3 seconds. And immediately Chen is like, oh, maybe Uncle did send someone useful. Oh, I think I like him.
I love, as they're doing the drive around Rome and you get to see all this stuff, she does basically say, how are you going to help me? Like, my uncle was supposed to send me someone who's going to help me. You know nothing about business. You know nothing about the mob. How are you supposed to be able to fix my situation? And he doesn't say that he's good at martial arts at this point. He's basically just like, don't worry about it. We'll get it all figured out. No
he's
problem.
So nonchalant about it. He's like, yeah, don't worry, I'll take care of that for you. He's like, yeah, but how? How are you going to take care of it?
So I understand why it builds up her frustration. Just to mention on that bank scene, I did see trivia, because it zooms in on the money for a moment, and then like it doesn't result in anything. It's just showing the money. Apparently, this isn't a joke for Chinese audiences, where essentially it would be the equivalent of pulling out like 80-year-old money to the bank. It's just like really old looking notes. And so that's where it was a little thing of showing how disconnected from like modern society he really was.
Okay. Yeah, obviously that was going to be lost on us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's one scene where she's kind of sitting down after the bank and says, look, you gotta trust people here.
Hold on. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Because this is, do you know what? This is the thing. This is how not important this is. Is that in my head, I just skipped over to when he goes to the restaurant with her. Right. But yeah, so they're sitting down, and they're in like a sort of one of the public sort of areas next to like a fountain where people are sitting. Where a lot of people go and eat their lunch kind of thing out in like kind of a nice area. And she's sitting on this bench with him. And she's like, look, you have to, you know, he wasn't a criminal. He was being nice. People are nice here. When they put their arm around you, they're trying to be nice. You should smile at them. Act like they are acting with you. And as she's telling him this, up behind her walks this attractive Italian woman who starts smiling at Bruce Lee. And she even sits like right on the other side of Chen and just keeps staring at Bruce, and Bruce is kind of like awkwardly staring back at her. And when Chen says, oh, you have to smile back at people when they smile at you, that's when the Italian woman smiles at him, and he sort of gives her this big cheesy grin. And then right after that, this Italian woman just sort of walks over to Bruce and puts her arm around him, and Bruce just sort of looks at her, looks back at Chen, and then puts his arm around the Italian woman, and Chen's like, and walks off.
That's the thing, is she literally said, like, whenever that's happening, they're just being friendly. Like, you should return the favor. And then he does so, and when she storms off, he's like, I don't know what I did. What did I do wrong here?
The Italian woman takes his hand and leads him away, and I'm like, he's just going with this Italian woman that he doesn't know now. And to make it even better, when she takes him to his place, and she says whatever, like, I'll be out in a minute, and he's just kind of looking around, when she walks out topless, right, and her boobs are out, he just gets scared and goes, "Oh no," and leaves. He just runs.
I love the sequence because she says, "Make yourself comfortable." So as she leaves the room, he stands up and starts doing little karate moves. Like he's just like punching the air,
Whoa.
completely oblivious as to what's going to happen.
No, Chuck Norris is karate. He's doing kung fu.
Sorry, kung fu.
Or Chinese boxing, as they called it in this as well, which I guess explained the boxing confusion we had with the last movie.
Yeah, probably. I think it's just a lack of it having terminology at that point, because nowadays it's pretty much just MMA. But yeah, no, he starts doing all the little moves, and then when she pops out, again, completely oblivious of like, oh, this was a sex thing. Bye, and he just runs out.
I mean, it's just likable. It's just kind of charming in a goofy way.
Yeah.
You know,
it absolutely endears me to the character, especially because the very next thing we see is he shows up at one of the restaurant workers' like apartments, which I think is over top of the restaurant.
Well, it's her apartment. So it is hers. Yeah, okay. It's her apartment. It's near the restaurant, and like the main. So there's like 5 restaurant workers that we get to. Well, we don't get to know them, but there's like 5 who train and do a little bit of fighting. But there's like a main sort of friendly one who doesn't really fight that much himself, but he's the one we meet here, who's like the most friendly to Bruce Lee.
I love it when he opens up the door, like it's brief introduction, and then he's just like, "So what took you so long?" And Bruce Lee just stands there. He doesn't say anything. He just like smiles politely, and the other guy's just like, "Okay, let's get going." Like he almost implying like, "Yeah, you were taken by one of the Italian women, weren't you?"
It happens to us all the time, buddy. You got to watch out for them.
They are passionate people.
Yeah. So they go to the restaurant, and this was a bit that confused me a little bit, because they introduce an uncle here, and I'm like, oh, is that the uncle that sent him? But it isn't. The uncle that sent him is back in Hong Kong. This is an uncle who just works with everyone here, that's separate from the other uncle. So that's important to remember here. But he kind of helps run the restaurant, and there's like 5 workers who we find out, because there's no customers, they're out in the back alley training their martial arts skills, and they're all dressed up and they're doing drills. And Bruce Lee goes out and kind of looks at them a little bit. And when they come over and introduce themselves, they're kind of friendly, but they a couple of them very quickly try and kind of turn it into a, "You don't look so tough. Why don't you show us what you've got, since you do Chinese boxing?"
They were probably told, like, by Chen of like, "Yeah, my uncle's sending someone who's going to fix our situation." And they're expecting like essentially Chuck Norris to show up and be like all huge and ripped and be like, "Yeah, this guy's going to solve our problems."
Yeah, so they hold up some pads, and like literally Bruce Lee is about to start, like, because he sort of like, you know, does a couple of like just taps where he's just sort of testing the pads, and he gets into the pose. He's ready, because they're all saying, "Oh, this isn't going to be that impressive," and I'm like, "You guys are going to get kicked into the walls. You're about to get like annihilated." And then just before he's about to raise his leg, someone yells, "Oh, we've got a customer, everyone come back in and get to work." And I'm like, "Oh, you tease, movie, you tease," because at this point we're like 25 minutes in or something like that, and I'm like, "Oh, you have been making me wait for him to actually throw some kicks and punches." But you know, we're getting there, So yeah,
I'm pretty sure they, even at that point, like they started up like a score where they were like, "Oh, okay, here it is, the fight music score," and then they just interrupted it with like, "Hey guys, customers," and it's like, "Oh, okay, full blue balls then, got it."
Yeah, which is perfect. That's a great touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's this strange comedic aspect to the entire first act that makes you feel like you're going to be like, you said Mr. Bean. At this point, it's kind of waning off of that, but it still has that kind of feel to it.
Yeah, it made me think, again, Mr. Bean is way goofier, obviously, but it made me think of Mr. Bean just silently interacting with Americans in the movie, where he comes to the US and he's just kind of like, "Oh, this is weird. Well, how do I interact with these people? Oh, that guy gave me the finger. I will return it. There you go. Have a finger."
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, customers are in, but almost immediately a couple of thugs come in from the gang and like say, "Hey, get out," like start causing trouble. And like the whole thing is that they're going out the back to have this fight, this step outside kind of thing, and like some of the guys who work here are like, "Oh, we can like take them on," like, and so they go up and they try and like fight, and it doesn't work. They get beat up, and Bruce Lee steps forward, and the main guy comes at him, and Bruce Lee in like maybe 2 moves are super rapid, puts them down and knocks them out. It's super quick, and it cuts to Chen's face, where her miserable face that she's had since she met this man changes to this. Oh, I think I like him. Oh, like the shift is so good because she's been like, her attitude towards him's been so consistent the entire first act that the second she sees that he is like a Terminator, she's like, oh no, things have changed.
Yeah. You even get like the camera push in on her. She's her face just goes from like to oh, all right.
Yeah, and then the other 2 guys obviously get taken out quickly as well. But it's like, okay, this is your first actual taste of Bruce Lee taking people out, and like everyone else is impressed. However, the uncle here is like, oh, I don't know if that was a good thing. I mean, they're going to want revenge now. No, I didn't take this as a sign of anything, because I thought he was just foreshadowing that, yeah, they're going to come back even stronger and things will escalate. Right. Obviously, there's a reveal much later on that I guess this was kind of the start of a little sprinkling of foreshadowing for. But anyway, so yeah, like, they're all impressed. They're like, hey, you can teach us, you can make us better and stuff. We could train when there's no customers.
Which is fairly often.
Yes, but that's the thing. We get like almost a very similar thing where a group of people come in to the restaurant like the next day or whatever, and like again, some bad guy shot, but there's more this time. And this time they come with like a... So it's kind of funny actually, because the last movie did have like a really like over the top, like, I mean, the last movie in Fist of Fury, it was like a sort of sniveling henchman, and this one is kind of like a camp henchman. Who clearly is like the translator for the main bad guy, and he's like, you know, because there's a whole thing here where, actually, I think it's before the first fight actually, where he actually comes out and like Bruce Lee's in the bathroom and he bumps into him, and and they all make fun of Bruce Lee because, oh, you bumped into him and apologize for it. Yeah, that must have come first actually. Now I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, so this is where that bit ends, but I just need to bring up here a recurring bit in the first act. Bruce Lee constantly needs to shit. Like, constantly. Like, he goes to the airport, he says, hey, before we hop in the car, can I use the John? And then as soon as they arrive at her apartment, it's, can you show me where the John is? And then he goes to this restaurant, and he's like, hey, guys, sorry I can't help you fight. I gotta go use the John. Like, I don't understand the bit here, but he constantly needs to go to the restroom.
2 things. He had 5 bowls of soup. That's point number 1. Point number 2, and I think this is the more notable part here, is that we do see him in the bathroom at the restaurant briefly, and the way he sits on the toilet seat is particularly notable, I thought.
Yeah, that again seems like it's a country bumpkin who doesn't understand city ways sort of thing.
Yeah, he's got his feet up in the toilet seat and he's kind of squatting on top of it as opposed to just sitting on it. It was, whatever works for you. Whatever works for you, I suppose.
Yeah.
So hell, I maybe rather use the bottom of my shoes on the toilet seat that's public than my actual ass, if I'm honest.
Yeah, but I have to assume the restaurant's at least somewhat clean.
I mean, better than an actual public toilet. Admittedly, we've been spoiled now with a look into what Tokyo's toilets are like from Perfect Days.
Oh my god, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, check out that review on Patreon, everyone, on the Criterion Cut. Anyway, so yeah, like obviously there's a couple other things that happen, overnight where like she gets up in the morning and he's like whittling little throwing like darts out of wood.
It's his weapon of choice essentially for the rest of the movie. Like he always has darts on hand.
Yeah, well, this is for dealing with people with guns. That's when he always uses it. It's whenever someone's got a gun, he'll dart them in the hand with his little wooden spikes. He also has nunchucks though. He does which I'll be honest. Like, I got confused when those nunchucks came out because I'm like, where were they? And I think they were supposed to be strapped to his back the entire time.
If so, they didn't make it clear because I was equally confused as you.
It was when he pulled out the second set of nunchucks, it looked like he was sort of pulling them from behind him, and I thought, oh, would they just might be on the back of his trousers the whole time?
Sure. Why not? I mean, they didn't make it clear that he had them. They had them on him at any given point. He just kind of pulled them out of nowhere.
Yeah. So the bad guys show up again, but this time they come with like a couple of guns and. Or actually, there's one guy with a gun first. There's 2 sequences actually that I'm mixing them up. There's the first sequence is just 3 guys and one has a gun, And I remember this being separate because he goes back to the big boss when we meet the big boss for the first time, and we see what he looks like. He's chewing out this guy because like, you had a gun, how did you lose?
Yeah.
Because Bruce Lee, of course, threw a spike at his hand and then beat him up.
Yeah, that was back at their home, wasn't it? I believe
No,
that was...
no. Well, that might be who he chews out, but you're thinking of the guy who's waiting in our room.
Right,
with the gun.
That's the one he chooses out. Yeah.
There's one at the restaurant who has a gun. Who
because they're all ready to start fighting. Like the whole crowd's just like, we've been training with Bruce Lee. We could take you on. And then the Italian guy pulls out a gun. And they're like, all right, we didn't get this far. We are surrendering. We're fine.
Yeah, I kind of liked how like the group at the restaurant who'd been training, like they do this thing where when the bad guys show up in force and there's a lot of them. And it becomes this thing. As soon as Bruce Lee takes out the gun, like all of the others at the restaurant all like start throwing punches. Like, oh, he disarmed him. We're not going to just like let him deal with it all. We're going to jump in and actually try and help. Did they do a good job? Did they succeed in helping? I mean, I don't know.
I think by the end they do show that they are competent within their own right. But at this early point in the movie, I think it's supposed to be a lot more of bodies for the bad guys to beat up to make Bruce Lee seem stronger.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But because this entire sequence is that like, okay, we're sick of this character because Tang Long's the name of Bruce Lee's character. They're sick of Tang interfering because by this point the main boss has found out about it. Like we kind of alluded to there after the second encounter at the restaurant when her and Bruce go back to her place. This guy's like waiting with a gun sitting in the dark. And of course, Bruce Lee just quickly throws a little dart at him, disarms him, and throws him out. And I love that this guy was here with a gun, and he wasn't threatening to kill them per se. He was like holding them at gunpoint to go and see the mob boss.
Yeah.
But he just throws them out and shuts the door and like, that's that dealt with. He's so nonchalant about it and just sits down and puts his feet up that I'm like, you should be a little bit more high tension here, Bruce.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously it adds to his badassness that he doesn't care about it all. But also, when they're driving around Rome at the beginning, Chen points out, like, that's their home base. Like, they know where they are. They know where all of these guys hang out. So it's not like it's a mystery of who sent this guy to begin with.
No, that's fair. But yeah, it's the next day she decides to take him, like, sightseeing. And one of his little running things as well is that whenever like someone gives him something from here, or she even makes him breakfast one of the mornings and says, hey, I made these myself. And he's like, oh, they taste better in Hong Kong. And she's like, but I made these myself. And he's like, I'll have more. Like, they're still good, but they're better in Hong Kong. And when she takes him out sightseeing and they're looking at some ruins, they go to like a fountain and she's like, isn't this fountain beautiful? And he's like, this country's weird. Like, this is like in Hong Kong, I would like build things on this land and make money from it. And I'm like,
it's so strange because he's literally looking at these pieces of art that have like survived generations. He's literally looking at the Roman temple ruins and saying like, this looks like a slum. They should tear it down and build a high rise here.
And she just kind of was like, okay, clearly this is not a man of this culture. I'm just going to take it back. Because it's when they're out that the bad guys really show up in force at the restaurant and kind of hold them all up. So when they get back, there's a big standoff and they're like, hey, we've got a plane ticket for you. Go back to Hong Kong and don't come back. Like, take him out at gunpoint. But of course, as soon as like the 2 or 3 guys that are taking him out at gunpoint get to that one alleyway set that we keep going back to, he just, quickly takes them out like they're nothing. There's a great moment here actually where he just kind of like there's a lot of little things where he'll just like do quick little jabs somewhere that'll be really painful, but it'll make them drop the gun or something like that. One of my favorite things, because this is the fight that escalates into, oh, there's a ton of them here in the alleyway now. Bruce Lee pulls out his nunchucks, and obviously he's spinning them around, he's hitting them in the face. But two particular instances stick out to me that I really like. One, he kind of holds like one part of the nunchuck and holds the other one back like a slingshot, and then just kind of whips it into someone's face. I thought that was pretty cool. And then the other one is that halfway through the fight, he decides he only wants one. He wants one hand free, so he throws down one of his nunchucks, and he's just using the one. Eventually, the one remaining bad guy picks up this set of nunchucks, and he's like, okay, I could use this too. And he tries to... And first of all, this guy immediately hits himself in the face.
Oh yeah,
with the nunchuck. It's so funny. And then Bruce Lee obviously just kind of wins, and like it just. But this is like the big fight. Like he's had a little fight before now, but this is like the big fight in the middle of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. This is that time where it shows in the middle, like, okay, we've given you tiny little things beforehand, but we're going to show you the full competency of this guy. And I like it because he keeps within the character that's been established here of, you know, he's not going for blood. He's just going for disabling them. But at the same time, this is also where you start to feel that little bit of a shift where it still has its comedic moments, but we're working in more of a serious fight scene aspect to it. So when this guy says Mamma Mia, just as like the capper to the scene, he's like, all right, that's kind of the last comedic moment we're really going to have here.
Yeah, you know, because Bruce Lee goes in and like, you know, him and the other guys like take out the rest of the crew, and this is where he says, "Hey, tell your boss this, like, you know, enough of this business, right? Leave this restaurant alone." And because I mean, the one comical thing that still kind of remains is the idea that this boss, instead of just finally admitting defeat, is like, "No, how can we finally take this guy down? He keeps ruining all my plans. What do we do?" And it's not actually until this isn't even the point in the movie where he makes the choice to try and bring in someone who might be as good at fighting as Bruce Lee. That happens after another failure. Like, there's a whole other failure after this where they try and hire, like, well, not even hire an assassin. They have one of their goons with a sniper rifle pointed at his head in the apartment. And
well, yeah, so this is another one of those things that I think is apparent in the original, like Chinese, if you're able to read it. There's a note that's left by the gang that ostensibly translates to, if he does not leave by midnight, we're going to kill him.
I was wondering why I kept looking at the clock, now you bring that up.
Yeah, so there was a note that was left that said, get him out of here or we're going to kill him by midnight. And so that's why she kept on pushing of just like, you got to go now. It's very important. But he ends up not going. One thing, though, in the previous scene, right after he kicks the boss out of the restaurant, Bruce Lee's just standing by the door. The door opens again. He's ready in a kick, and then it turns out it's just customers. And they were just like, whoa, hold on, please don't kill our customers. And the customers are looking around like, what's going on? And you see everyone just like tidying up after the fight. But specifically what got me was the one guy who doesn't fight. He picked up one of their pistols at a point. And so he's like tucking it into his jacket pocket, just like, hey, hi, he's welcome just, to our store.
He's trying to hide it, but and we know he's innocent, but it must look really bad if you walk in and they're just like,
absolutely.
Oh, put this handgun away just somewhere. Yeah, like obviously like them trying to assassinate him is one thing, but the actual result of the scene is that they're able to kidnap Chen. Like Chen gets kidnapped and taken to the main mob boss. And this is the thing where I thought, oh, maybe this is kind of going to be the plot of the rest of the movie. But instead, like, she says to them, like, no, I'm not signing any, like, sales, like, documents. And also, Bruce Lee's coming. Like, he's on his way right now. And the only thing we had to doubt that is that when he tried to phone the restaurant, that's when he was struggling to read the number to the operator. So we thought, I thought maybe he, like, will struggle to get here just because he can't get his way around or something.
Yeah, I thought he would have been fine to get there. I think the difference I was expecting, because it seems like he was trying to call the restaurant, I thought he was going to be forced to show up there alone.
Yes.
And therefore facing down all the goons, like, absolutely on his own, on their turf, would have been something a lot harder for him. But ultimately, they all arrived together. So I don't think the struggling to read the number really amounted in anything.
It's a big heroic moment, though, because, like, she says that, and then immediately, well, almost immediately, you hear a whistle, and, you know, he's standing at the door with all the other guys from the restaurant who all, like, you know, jump in and fight with him, and, like, they don't win as quickly as he does or as efficiently, but they do kind of hold their own in the fight. Like, it feels like they've learned something from him, so this is what makes it more tragic when someone kills them all later on in the movie. So, you know, he basically, once again, has embarrassed everyone in this bad guys group. Like, he goes like, he's beating them all up, like it was easy. He, you know, walks up to the boss and, like, sort of punches him onto his chair and kind of, like, wags his finger in his face and all this stuff. And it's like this movie has been nothing but a series of times where it's almost like like half a season of Power Rangers, where Rita Repulsa keeps trying to win, and those pesky Power Rangers keep stopping her. That's how this movie's progressed with Bruce Lee and this villain.
I agree, save for the fact, and this is the time that kind of pissed me off that he didn't do something more, is that he's about to, and then Chen chimes up with, "Don't even worry about it. Like, he's whatever." And he listens, and he once again just says, "Seriously, back off." And I'm like, no, it's like, do something, do anything here. He punched him once in the stomach, and that's it. And I feel like there needs to at least be a little bit of the like fear of God strucken into this man in order to get him to stop. And Chen should realize that as well at this point.
I mean,
you know?
I get it, but the heroes, like, I get why the movie's not doing that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're heroes, but at the same time, it's a kung fu movie. Like, I want to see the bad guy get beaten up. That's kind of what I'm coming here for.
Well, I get it, but like this isn't Fist of Fury where he's out for blood, right? This is not these type of characters. They're more like wholesome and like not picking fights unless they have to fight. The only person in this movie that Bruce Lee kills is the one who just like is good enough to keep fighting back and will not stop unless he's killed. Like, that's the only and like I actually love how serious he seems to take it when that happens. Like, I know we're skipping ahead a little bit, but this is this failure that incites the we have to find someone who can fight him. And like the henchman dude, the campy one, is like, well, I know a Japanese guy who's really good, and I know an American who's really good at karate. And then, you know, that leads to like Chuck Norris arriving on the plane and like the music going nuts for him. And
you say the music's going nuts. The camera, as he's walking out, is literally at crotch level, and we get a he's walking up, just zoomed right into his nuts.
Yeah, which reminds me, there was the build up to the Nunchuck fight is when we got some of the really good camera work that really stuck out to me. I'm like, oh, this feels like it's an evolution where it's like a lot better than the previous two movies, and I was really impressed with that.
There was a shot where he like flipped over one of the guys, knocked him down on his stomach, and then Bruce just sat on his back. And then there's this tracking shot as he's just got his hands crossed in front of his face, just waiting for one of the other guys to make his move. And I was like, that's the most badass shot I've seen in this movie so far.
Yeah. Just a lot of good little moments like that. So from here it's like, okay, like the good guys are definitely gullible. There's no denying that, because like the henchman dude goes to speak to them and says, "Hey, we want to meet with you to talk about, you know, putting this all behind us.
Do you guys want to work with the mafia? Because we got a deal for you."
But of course, it's a trap, because they've got this, you know, couple of fighters in to take on Bruce Lee.
This is literally like all of these people. I don't know how they survived as kids, because they literally are like, "Hey, let's go to this restaurant that's nice and public." And they're like, "Okay, sure." And they go there, and the guy's like, "Oh, the boss couldn't show up, but we could drive over there now." And immediately they're like, "Okay," like not seeing anything wrong with it at all. And of course, they're driven to the middle of nowhere where these two karate guys, not Chuck Norris yet, but these two other karate guys show up and are ready to kick their asses.
Yeah, the two that are the better fighters that we've seen in the movie, but not as good as Chuck Norris. So like the
mini boss. Yeah,
the mini boss, effectively. And like the other guys from the restaurant like get their asses kicked, so Bruce Lee has to step in, and he's able to, because at first they're like, "Oh, we can take care of these two," kind of thing, but they can't really. Bruce Lee has to do it, but he has to go looking for Chuck Norris, and I actually really like this. There's like a whole game of cat and mouse around like the ruins and stuff, where like he looks across and like Chuck Norris is standing in the opposite end of it. Honestly, for a second I thought this might even be it isn't the Coliseum, because they're not in the city, they're not in the middle of the city.
It is the Coliseum.
Is it? But they were at like a the location makes no sense then, but fine.
Here's the thing I think that they thought, we want to have a fight in the Coliseum because that'd be really cool. The issue is, you are not allowed to film in the Coliseum.
Fine, yeah.
These shots that they stole these shots. They were not allowed to be filming there, and they had to get in and get out very quickly. So I'd imagine that filming these other scenes in the city would be, you know, permit hell. It's the same sort of reason why we saw all of the cars
'Cause
from the outside.
Because I legitimately went, oh, that looks like the Colosseum, but it can't be. That was the thought I had when I saw like the more recognizable part of it. And the reason why I thought that is because, well, we saw the Colosseum earlier in the movie, and I also just know from seeing other photos and video of it that it's literally surrounded by busy main roads. Like, it's in the middle of the city, right?
Yeah. I think it's just supposed to be one of those things where it's in the context of this movie, you just have to accept the Colosseum is out in the middle of nowhere, and
But they showed it not be there earlier on.
No, well, to be fair, they showed the outside of it earlier on. I think maybe you're not supposed to know that this is the inside of the Colosseum. Maybe it's not supposed to be the Colosseum, but it definitely is the Colosseum.
All right. Anyway, but we get this game of cat and mouse where he looks across the Colosseum and he sees Chuck Norris standing in one of the little openings, right? And then it becomes this like game of cat and mouse where he's just trying to find him, and it's actually almost like a tense thriller as he's looking around, and it's all silent. And there's one point where you see Chuck Norris looking down at him as Bruce Lee's looking for him, and I'm like, oh, this is actually building a lot of for a villain who's been introduced in the last like half hour of the movie, who has basically no backstory. They're doing a decent job of building up to like the showdown.
Oh yeah, it does two great things that I loved here, which is everything you're saying about the cat and mouse, but specifically Ho, the translator guy, his voice just disembodied off to the side is just saying like over and over again, like, this man's gonna kill you. He's going to murder you. That's his only goal, and he is capable of doing it. And then they do one shot, which is hearkening back to, what the Colosseum was actually built for, where Chuck Norris up on top of like one of the upper rings, he sticks out his thumb and does the thumbs down motion to Bruce Lee. And I'm like, that's so badass. It's selling him as this. I don't know if this is me bringing my modern knowledge of Chuck Norris into it, but it almost doesn't feel like it's villainous. It just feels like an equal. Like, it doesn't feel like he has any bad blood against Bruce Lee. It's just more about, I am the only one who's going to stop you, and I've been taken on to do that. It's almost like they have their own code sort of thing going on.
Yeah, I mean, they do eventually find it. It's not like Chuck Norris jumps out and like blindsides him or anything like that. It's just like, in fact, it's the opposite, where they both take time to take off their tops and like flex and do some like warm-up punches and stuff. And Bruce Lee, I swear, he does things with his back muscles as he's stretching, where I'm just like, how are you doing that?
There's a recurring motif throughout this fight of a little kitten that's like watching the fight. And it shows the cat like stretching, and then it shows him like also doing a stretch, but like propping his shoulder blades out a good 6 inches. And I'm like, well, I get the visual metaphor you're going for there, but I'm surprised he could do that, because that doesn't seem human.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like bones cracking sound effects every time he does these little stretches. So it feels like he's cracking bones in his body that none of us can ever crack. Like,
yeah,
it just.
And then there's also, anytime either of them are like throwing a punch in these warm-up punches, there's like, I wouldn't call it a mini sonic boom, but there's like a little air whooshing noise that like really packs a deep bassy punch.
There's a thud to it when there's no. There shouldn't be a thud, but there's a thud.
Yeah, exactly. They're literally punching the air molecules out of the way.
And I think this fight that they have is very grounded again. They don't make it overly flashy. They make it more be just about how it goes back and forth, and how, Chuck Norris hits him in the face, he knocks him down. Bruce Lee actually has to, like, for the first time in the movie, really, he's properly challenged, and it goes backwards and forwards. But it's not like there's like big fancy moves that where I'd really point any of them out in particular. What I remember from this more than anything is more just like the tone and the feeling of the whole thing, and like particularly towards the end of it, when Bruce Lee does get the upper hand and actually is able to kind of like basically break his arm and maybe even his leg, and Chuck Norris like struggles to get back to his feet, and there's a moment where he kind of falls down and you think, oh, that's the end of it because he can't stand up. But then Chuck Norris is like, no, I'm not giving up. And he props himself up against the wall. He's standing there ready to go more fighting, even though he clearly can't. His arm is gone. He can't do this with one arm. Yeah. But he's determined to do it. And Bruce Lee even shakes his head at him like, no, don't do this. Like, it's over already. You don't have... But he does, and Bruce Lee has to kill him because it's like, he's not going to stop, right?
Yeah.
He's going to keep coming no matter what. I love that like minute or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Loved it.
No, I love the way that we see for the first time in this movie battle scars on them. Like we see bruises forming, we see blood coming out of like Chuck Norris's nose as this is going on. And I absolutely adore the tone of how it is selling that this is a fight to the death. Like you want to break the guy's arm, you want to break the guy's leg, fine, whatever, but it doesn't stop. Like it has to keep going until one of you is dead. And whether Bruce Lee likes that or not, he understands that that is how this has to go.
Yeah, a bit like a hero, he tries to stop, like, just like say to him, no, don't. Like, this can just end here. But it's because Chuck Norris is still making this decision that he knows that, okay, I have to end this properly. I have to take this to its logical conclusion. And the result of that afterwards is that Bruce Lee does look heartbroken that he had to kill someone. And he even goes and picks up his karate jacket and his black belt and comes over and covers his body. And it's like this little moment of, oh, a fallen warrior who was my equal, or close to my equal, I guess, in this case.
No, this is, I think, the first time, because he's had to kill for this, he absolutely, because Ho now is just scattering around the Coliseum. Like, he's just running off and away now that he realizes that Bruce Lee's still alive. And Bruce Lee, for the first time in this movie, yells, he screams in anger at Ho for, like, causing this to happen. And so he hunts him down and is ready to, like, finish this once and for all.
Yeah, and it pretty much... I mean,
we skipped over the big reveal that happened as Bruce Lee left to go fight Chuck Norris.
Yeah, that doesn't even really matter that much, though.
It doesn't.
All in the fact that it gets all the other guys killed, because basically the uncle character pulls out a blade and stabs him. Turns out he's working for the bad guy, and he wants to he's getting paid off to help, like, you know, getting the restaurant to them. He's like, I'm going to go back to Hong Kong, a rich man. And all it really amounts to, other than the fact that he's killed all the other guys, the one who doesn't fight isn't here though, so he does survive, but the other four fighters all get killed. And when Bruce Lee comes out to see him, he pretends that he got slashed. He sort of slashes his own arm to make it look like he was in a fight and he's been injured. But when Bruce Lee's like sort of standing off against Ho, and like when the main boss man shows up with his gun, he actually comes up behind him to stab Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee just happens to catch him in the act, and very quickly has to, you know, reconvene. He ends up having to like run over and hiding behind like a tree because the mob boss shows up and just starts firing a gun at him. Like, for the first time in the movie, he's not got his little darts to like disarm him.
Well, he does have darts. He just misses.
He
throws like 2 darts and they don't manage to stab himself in the hand. But of course, this is where finally we find out Rome has police.
Yes,
and they actually do something.
Yes, they show up and actually arrest the mob boss, presumably. And the final scene of the movie is he's at the grave site with Chen, and he's basically saying, "Oh, I have to go. You know, my uncle wants me elsewhere.
We've taken care of your restaurant situation. There's literally nobody left to try to buy you out, so you're good."
And she clearly wants him to stay, but it's kind of this idea that he's this almost like a Mad Max type wanderer who's going to go and like help someone else who's in need now. That's the way it feels like as he walks off at the end, is like he's always going to live this life of solitude and go in and help someone else.
Well, I like what the last guy says, is it's not even the fact of he lives this life of solitude because that's who he is. He specifically phrases it as, in this world of knives and guns, he's forced to walk alone. It's this, you know, he is someone who is going to go up against violence with violence, and in doing so, he has to remain separate from everyone else, lest, you know, you run into the Lois Lane problem of, my loved ones can be attacked.
Yeah, so he walks off and the credits play as he's walking off. It's a nice ending. It's kind of like, I really can't compliment enough how much character development the end of the fight with Chuck Norris did for both characters. Chuck Norris, barely a line of dialogue, right? Barely any build up to him, other than just the threat of him being imposing. And then Bruce Lee, of course, has been this sort of goofy, comical figure for most of the movie. But all of a sudden, the way that they both react to the end of that fight, and Bruce Lee's reaction after he's killed Chuck Norris, everything about that just sort of like really painted them as like more developed characters. And it did it by not saying dialogue, but by just showing how this action and this event has, and how he feels about it. it tells us a lot about who he is in a way that like the rest of it didn't. So yeah, dare I say that I do think this overall is the best of the three that we've done so far. I don't think it's like a huge leap necessarily, because I think both the other movies had their own strong elements. They had their own goofy elements. And this one, likewise, like there's a lot of like goofiness in the first half, and some of it's endearing, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of back and forth where we're constantly going back to the restaurant, constantly going back to the alleyway behind the restaurant,
right.
where we're constantly just dealing with the villain who keeps coming back for more. Like there is it's definitely simple in how it executes its plot, but there's definitely some interesting decisions towards the end, for sure.
Yeah. No, I think the ending of this is kind of the fully realized of what Big Boss was trying to do. And don't get me wrong, Big Boss's ending did have its own kind of punch, but I think this is kind of what they were really aiming for in terms of the tone and how it just developed the character and made it this larger than life fight in its own right. These are totally normal fight moves they're doing. It's not like anyone's jumping ridiculously high or like punching out somebody's organs with a single thing, but like it has this gravitas to it because of the way that it's presented and the way that they wrap up the fight as well. They keep this tone of somberness to it that really adds to both the characters. And as much as the goofiness in the first half is endearing in its own way, I agree with you that I think that this movie is probably better than the other two by some margin because of how much this fight just completely elevates the character for the back half.
Yeah, and it's, you know, probably the best filmed and like cinematography wise of the three as well. So I mean, credit to Bruce Lee, because not only is he the star, not only does he have the power of the star in the movie itself, he's also the one who's actually making all those decisions about how to present the movie. He also wrote the script as well, so any failings are also his. But yeah, this is one of those things where, hey, it's not a disaster when someone wrote, directed, and starred in the movie, which we're so used to on extra reels as you know,
all the time,
that being a train wreck. So that's cool. It's it definitely like still has some of its novelties of the time period and some of its like silliness right in places, but by the end does have a bit more to it than the other ones that we've done so far. So
yeah, I think the only thing that I would put this as underneath the other films is that it does feel a lot more reliant on sets. It feels a lot like you were commenting on that with the last one, where there were a couple sets that just felt so completely separate from everything else. I feel like that's this whole movie. You get the airport and Rome, and that's it.
Yeah, the final fight, once they've done doing the cat and mouse thing around the Colosseum, like once they get into like the final part where they're going to have the fight, like you can actually see the backdrops that are meant to be like the extended like sort of, I don't know if you call them hallways of the Colosseum, but like curving
around. Matte paintings,
there's matte paintings on either side behind them, and they're fighting in either a set or maybe just somewhere that had a, you know, a little sort of ruined looking area that they could use. But regardless, you know, it does wear kind of its filmmaking on its sleeve in that sense at times. That said, though, it's definitely going for a lot more grounded in its fighting and in its style compared to the last two. This is not like, it's okay, like it's very comfortable having the characters be kind of cartoony, but it has no interest in the fighting being cartoony. And that's what I was getting from this. Because even when the fighting's a little bit funny, like the guy hitting himself with a nunchuck, it's very like, it's believable. It's like that's like something that an idiot would actually do with the nunchuck, as opposed to something over the top.
All of Bruce Lee's filmography has always led me to the understanding that he views fighting as serious. He views it as something that should not be taken lightly. It's not just, you know, jumping around, punching people. It's whenever it's used, it will cause violence. It will cause damage to other people. And as much as you will have these fight scenes where he knocks these people out and does whatever, you still get things like the ending of Big Boss, where he has to face the consequences for his actions. You still get in this movie where in this scenario, he ends up having to kill someone, and it's not something that he's able to shrug off as, he was trying to kill me. Like, it hits him. It hits him deeper than that. So I feel like that's kind of Bruce Lee's, not knowing much more about him than what's presented in these movies, that's his view on, you shouldn't take this style of violence to be this silly thing. Everything else can be silly, but violence itself should be treated with seriousness.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're getting into the categories here then, and the final questions. So, what was your scene of the movie?
So, exiting the movie, I was kind of a bit more on, there are two halves to this movie, one being the the silly first half, and then the serious third act. I was trying to decide of a moment between both of those. In the first part of it, I was leading towards just honest to God, the opening shot and that whole sequence of the woman just staring at him, because it I don't know why, it just hit my funny bone. Like, if Bruce Lee wanted to write a comedy, I think he could have. I honest to God think he could have just written a straight comedy through and through without any sort of kung fu in it. But ultimately, if we're talking about the movie as a whole, I think the most impactful scene is pretty obvious. It's the fight to the death with Chuck Norris. And if I have to narrow it down slightly from that, it's going to be just the back half of the fight going into him laying his gi and belt on him, because that's just, it lended so much to both characters with such a simple action.
Yeah, there's a lot of enjoyable scenes. The nunchuck fight's obviously great. A lot of the funny stuff in the first half is endearing, but I have to pick the same thing. I have to pick the final beats of the fight and Chuck Norris refusing to give up even though he's clearly about to lose. They said a lot about both characters, and like Bruce Lee, the weight of the death on him, I think just landed really well for me. So yeah, that's my pick. MVP feels like a stupid question for this, but I mean, not only is Bruce Lee clearly the pick for just on-screen performers, he also wrote and directed it. So I mean,
yeah.
So, who else is it?
I'm giving it to the Italian woman at the beginning. She really earned that one. No, of course it's Bruce Lee.
I really liked her boobs, so she gets MVP.
She's the one thing that in the IMDb Parents Guide boosts the thing to a mild nudity score. And that's deserving of an MVP spot.
I feel like Americans wouldn't call that mild.
I mean, you got to remember, we've also got like super Christian values as well. So any sort of nudity, you got to bump that up to.
That's what I'm saying, though. I feel like Europeans...
Oh, you think it's moderate?
No, I'm saying Americans would think it's moderate. Like I'm saying,
right.
Europeans would think, oh yeah, boobs is like that's like the lowest form of nudity. That's the easiest one. But Americans, I feel like, oh, there's nipples. No, this is the burn it at the stake.
Dude, I every once in a while I get this view, this perspective on my country of like, oh God, we really haven't moved past the 1600s, have we?
Yeah, there's just a couple of guys in Salem that have got the witch trial, like they're just in case they need those stocks and the various like killing devices that they're ready.
Yep.
They're waiting for the laws to be put back in place.
And the first thing it'll be is the people who let their nipples out.
Anyway, okay, so categories then, David, go on. Run the gauntlet.
All right, so visuals, I do think this one had a distinctive visual style. It really did well in capturing the fight scenes. We didn't mention it, there was an opening title sequence that it wasn't too creative with like showing any sort of fight stuff, but it did lead into the movie well because it was a very, I'll say Oriental sort of theme. You had like dragons and stuff like that, and it showed crossing the ocean, which then led very nicely into him arriving in Rome. So I appreciated that. Overall visuals, I would probably say solid 7. I think that there's still a bit more that I'm looking for from visual flair, specifically of my memories of what Enter the Dragon ends up being. But we'll get there when we get there. In terms of sound, strangely enough, this one has everything dubbed after the fact. So there is nothing that is original audio here as far as I could tell. But I liked it more. I liked the consistency of it. I like the fact that, not some characters were speaking one way and some characters were speaking another. I feel like it all kept a very consistent style to it. And like I said at the beginning, there was this catchy tune that they were using for Bruce Lee's comedic bits that is still in my head. So I gotta bump that up a little bit from what I have been giving these sounds. I think that one's probably also going to hit a 7 for me. Acting, it's great. I the only criticism I give is I don't know if this is an acting bit or a voiceover bit, but they're in the opening acts, all of the restaurant workers, when they're kind of just sitting around talking, have this constant underlying chuckling to themselves where they're just going like all the time. It got a bit grating for me once I noticed it, but I don't know if that's an acting thing or if specifically the voiceover was just making it that grating. So with that still being such a minor thing, like acting in the back half is fantastic. I do appreciate it. I think that one's I think I'm going to give that one an 8. It barely scratches by. It's between a 7.5 and an 8, but I do think I'm going to get up to the 8 on that. Screenplay, script, that is where it falls down a little bit. I think that while it is a solid moral, a solid message that it's giving, and it's a very simple plot, it is still just a very simple plot. I can't say that there's too much complicated, and even then the first like 50 minutes of this movie are literally just the same thing happening 3 or 4 times of goons show up at the restaurant, we fight back the goons, and then repeat. So it's a little bit repetitive in that way, but ultimately I do still like it to some extent, so I think I'm going to give it a 6. And finally is production value, which for these, I'm going to involve the sets in here as well.
I think you should. I mean, I think locations are a part of production value for sure.
I mean, working in actual Rome, when they did the outside shots, it looked great. I'm glad that they worked in some of that stuff. So kudos on there, but I do think that, like you said, going back to this back alley set over and over and over again, using that, the set for the restaurant, using the set for the fight scene with Chuck Norris, it did feel a little bit dependent on that stuff. I would have liked to see more fight scenes in, maybe not, middle of Rome, but at least something that seemed Roman rather than just what is clearly the warehouse district sort of thing. So I'm going to say production value is going to take a little bit of a hit for me, and I'm going to put that one down at a 6.5.
Okay. All right, for me, visuals, I do think it looks the best of the movies we've done in this season so far. It's a more confident style. I don't really have a whole lot to fault with it, so I really think this is getting up there to like at least a 7.5 as far as the visuals go. Sounds, again, it's a little bit tougher with these ones because it's a dub and it's not the original audio and all that, but I will say that it did know when to shut up. Right, it going quiet for just the fighting sounds during that final fight was inspired. Same with the cat and mouse bit. Like all of that, I thought was really well done, and just the echoey voice of the campy henchman yelling he's going to kill you, like he's a announcer at like the Colosseum almost.
Yeah.
Like I think that was well done. So yeah, I think a solid 7 there as well overall for the audio. For acting, yeah, this is an interesting one because I think it boils down to like solid enough for the supporting cast. I think the female lead who plays Chen, I think she does a simple enough but solid job of like, that change she has from thinking Bruce Lee's a waste of time to all of a sudden being into him. But she doesn't have like tons to do after that point, right? So that's kind of the extent of the main parts that are memorable about her. And I think that Chuck Norris is actually solid here in a role where he's not speaking, because he's not got a lot of charisma when he opens his mouth. That's the one big problem with Chuck Norris. Yeah. But as the silent, deadly type, he works quite well. But ultimately, it all comes down to Bruce Lee in the lead. And yeah, like we said this in the very first one we did. It's been true of all three. I mean, admittedly, this one first part I'm going to mention wasn't as true in the last one, because the last one he wasn't a very happy character. But whenever he decides to have a big smile or like be into what the character's doing, it's very endearing. And then other times when he is kind of annoyed and wants to get his fight on, that also works really well. Like he is a movie star. He carries things very well and holds it. So I think I'm not going to go quite as high as you. I think I'm going to go still with a 7.5, but I think that's just because I have to kind of average it out a little bit with, a bunch of guest stars who are just fine, or as a guest stars, supporting roles is what I mean. And then for script story, yeah, it is the weakest thing. It is probably something in that 6 range, just because it is so simple. And it like I think the big failing for me, if I was to point at one, is that I think I should have hated the villain more, like as in the mob boss. But he almost felt like an afterthought. Like he's just there because he needs to exist, not because he himself is interesting. And I think that's something that the script could have really like focused on and fleshed out a little bit. Is maybe making us hate him. But 6 out of 10, it works well enough. Everything else elevates it though, of course. And then production value, it's kind of a mixed thing because you have some real locations, of course, but you also have these repeated sets over and over again. I would probably say the production value is a little bit less than the last movie overall because of that, despite having a few big shots of the Colosseum, which feels huge and expensive because it is, but at the same time, it's just a couple of shots.
It's the shot themselves. What's in the shot is expensive, but they didn't have to get permits or anything, so it's literally free.
Yes, but that's the thing. Production value is not measuring how much something costs, just how expensive it feels. That's the important part.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I will. I think I'll go 6.5 on production value. I think I'll land there. I think it's the performance, the visuals, the sound, it's the technical stuff, and the star power that really like gets this one above the line quite comfortably. So, David, what are you rating overall the Way of the Dragon, or just Way of the Dragon? Sorry.
Yeah. I feel like this one is better than the previous two, but I don't think I'm quite ready to say that it's great. It's got great moments. I think that it is, like I said, that the end of that fight, as much as we praised it, it is a great moment to it, but it's not enough to get the entire movie up to that level. I think my biggest issue is I was really into this in the first 20 minutes, and I was really into it in the last 20 minutes, but the middle bit kind of just slogged for me a tiny bit. Not that it felt bad at any point, it just felt repetitive. So I got to keep it away from that, but I am still going to give it a 7.5.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I give the last two both a 7 for different reasons. I think this is definitely going above that. Yeah, I'm kind of wrestling. Am I going 7.5 or am I going 8?
Right.
I think overall it probably is a 7.5, even though I do think there's some moments that punch above that weight. So I'll agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of making the cut, is this the first Bruce Lee movie that wholly and entirely makes it above the cut? I would say yes. I think that this is the first one that is not cutting it close. It actually does make the cut. Not any higher than that, but...
What's so funny is that the averages for these 3 movies were 7, and then 7.25, and then this one's 7.5. So it's just inching up each time on average.
Which means Game of Death is going to be a 8.5. Congratulations.
I doubt that somehow, based on reputation. I think it just makes the cut. It's on that. Like, I think it's 7.5. Not that it always has to match the score necessarily. Right. Sometimes you'll get like a great like 4 out of 10 that needs to make the cut. But but I think a 7.5, if you are just going by score, is exactly that number that's just on the cusp of maybe making the cut or maybe cutting it close. Because I think an 8 out of 10, it's like obviously it makes the cut because 8 is great. But good doesn't always make the cut, and this is definitely good, even very good. Yeah, but
yeah, I would say so.
So I'll agree with it. And I think because we've went through this is the benefit of doing a season of this, is that I appreciate what this does compared to the first two. That makes me probably like it even a little bit more than if I had just seen it on its own in a vacuum.
Yeah, for sure. If you were just seeing it on its own, you just think, oh, it's Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris. That's what's special about this. But now that we have the benefit of the previous two, you know, like, oh, this is also seeing Bruce Lee evolve, and not only as an actor, but getting in director's chair, getting into writing, seeing how he can do that.
Yeah, the context of that does make this a little more interesting than just watching them individually at random times. So, There you go. And that, in many ways, that was the entire concept of this show to begin with.
Hey,
So-
it only took us 2 years plus, however long it's been.
I mean, I feel like it's come up naturally in the franchises, but this is probably, I think this and like when we did David Fincher is where we really got a sense of like a career evolving throughout the
Right.
movies.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, next time, of course, we will be tackling Enter the Dragon, which is by far the most famous of the movies. It's the one that is completely an American production. So it's, we got John Saxon in there as well in a supporting role. Excited to dive into that. And it's the only one that I've seen before, of course. So
Yep.
we'll be doing that next time on the show. Of course, you can support the show and everything we do here at MailFuzz Movies over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. As part of Patreon, me and David do 2 bonus monthly shows. One is the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection, and the other is Extra Reels, where we review some of the worst things ever made. And that means a movie here or there by Uwe Boll, a movie here or there by Neil Breen.
Just as a peek behind the curtain, we've supposed to have been filming a Neil Breen one like 3 recording sessions in a row, and it just keeps getting pushed because we're not ready.
Yeah, I'm not prepared mentally, physically, or in any way. Right now, this will be long done by the time this episode goes out, but right now, the vote on Patreon for the next one is 3 movies starring Hulk Hogan. So that gives you a sense of the type of trash that gets reviewed on that show. So if that sounds fun, you can go check out the Patreon and have a look there. And if you are signing up for Patreon and you use an Apple iOS device of any kind, set up your account and payment with something else, because Apple automatically adds 30% to all the prices, and it doesn't benefit anyone but Apple. No one, like Patreon, don't get that money. We get none of that money. So just go sign up and something. You can still use that device to log in afterwards and use the content. You just need to set up on a different device.
Or if you'd like, get in contact with me, send the money directly to me, and I promise I'll get it to Pete.
I would not recommend that. Unlike the banker in this movie, David is a thief, so don't send him the money.
How dare you, sir?
So thank you very much.
Just remember, cash only.
Thank you very much for joining it, everyone. We do appreciate it. Keep watching movies. Let us know in the comments what you think of Way of the Dragon. Like, subscribe, all the usual stuff that everyone always tells you on YouTube. But that is us, so thank you once again. Keep watching movies, and if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.